Hello! Today I am going to be running a Hollow Knight category for you called All Skills. I'm going to get right into the game. Timing starts when we select a new file, so we start now. The game starts with a few introductory cutscenes setting up the lore of the game. Luckily, all of these cutscenes are skippable, so we can skip right on in. The category that I'm going to be running today is called All Skills. The goal is to collect all of the major abilities in the game and then finish the game. It's a great introductory category. It is one of the more popular mainboard categories for Hollow Knight, and I'm going to be running on the latest patch of the game, so patch 1.5. If you're familiar with Hollow Knight speedrunning, you may know that there are a lot of tricks and speed tech that are used throughout the run. I'll be using quite a few of those in this run. It does a pretty good showcase of all of the various types of speed tech in the latest patch speedrun of the game. But this is also just a fantastic category to get into as a beginner. So right there we use the first bit of speed tech that's going to be really used all throughout the run, and it is the pogo. This is a bit of intended movement, but we actually use it to great effect to do a number of skips throughout the game, including the shade skips that we pogo our own shade, which appears after we die, and also some enemy pogos to get to areas that we are not supposed to get to yet. The very beginning of this run is pretty chill. We don't have any major movement abilities yet, so we're mostly just walking places, slashing, doing all sorts of things to keep us occupied, because really there's not a whole lot going on at the very, very beginning. But yeah, Hollow Knight is obviously one of the most successful indie games of all time. It is become a staple of the Metroidvania genre, and it is one of the more popular speed games as well. This category has over 100 runners, and there are hundreds of runners for basically all of the mainboard categories in Hollow Knight. All right, so there I'm using one additional bit of speed tech that is actually physics frame perfect. So it is called an inventory drop. The goal of that trick is you press the inventory as soon as you walk off a ledge, and if you do it at the right time, then you fall with uncapped fall speed. On latest patch, that is physics frame perfect. On an older patch of the game, which is a slightly faster patch for most categories, you can actually do it any time. You can open it in mid-air, whereas on latest patch, we have to do it as we walk off a ledge. So you'll see me going for it a few places throughout this run, but I won't always get it. All right, we're just going through Crossroads. You may have noticed a cute little double spike kill that we used, hitting a falling spike into enemies. That is one thing that is always a fun trick in this speedrun, but it's actually pretty easy to do. One of the best first tricks you can do if you're picking up this game for the first time. Right now we are heading toward the first major ability, and as part of this category, we're going to collect not only every major movement ability, but also every spell, and also all of the nail arts. These are extra little combat abilities that we can use throughout the run, and are counted as major abilities for the purposes of this speedrun. The idea of all skills is not particularly well defined by the game, so this is more of a community-created speed category to have a little bit of fun, and it is one of the better categories in my opinion. All right, here we're going to use actually a dev-intended shortcut. That is the first boss of the game, but we don't actually need to kill them. We can skip out of that arena if we simply hit the wall a few times after the first phase of that fight is over. That is a dev-intended shortcut. You can leave that fight and come back later after you pick up the first spell, which will be in here. If you come back to the arena the second time, the wall will be reinforced. False Knight realizes that you've gotten out the first time and wants to stop you from doing it again. Luckily, we will not be returning to False Knight. We have no reason to kill him in this category. All right, so that is the Vengeful Spirit ability that I'm picking up here. It is our first spell, and it is our first long-range weapon, really. This is a fireball, and I will refer to it as such for pretty much the entire run. This is actually going to be a pretty important piece of movement tech in the early game here, and I will explain that as we continue with the run a little bit. But the first thing that happens after we pick up this ability is they lock us in this little area here called Ancestral Mound, and we cannot get out until we go through what is effectively a tutorial on how to use Vengeful Spirit. So I'm just going to be walking through here and coming up to an enemy, which this is our first time seeing. It is the Balder. The Balder is an RNG fest for Hollow Knight speedrunning. It has a 50% chance of shooting these little mini Balders, which we need, and a 50% chance of just spitting a bit of acid that we have to dodge. You really need the little Balders because you need to gather enough soul to shoot another fireball, and if the Balder decides to shoot acid instead, then you simply have to wait. So, fun little bit of RNG here. Luckily, the spits are each quick. You lose about a second for each spit you get, and at 50-50 chance, it's not too bad. Pretty unlikely that you'd end up with, for example, over 20 spits between the two Balders we fight in this run. But that is in fact what happened to me at some point. So, you know, sometimes the luck just does not go your way. Alright, here's the second Balder. This is the reason that we have to pick up the Vengeful Spirit ability. This Balder is blocking our entrance to Greenpath. Hollow Knight is a Metroidvania, if you are not aware, and that means there's a lot of abilities which act as keys to access areas which have gates, which are effectively locks. So in this case, the Balder is the lock, and Vengeful Spirit is our key. We can enter Greenpath here and get to our next major piece of progression. Greenpath is a pretty long and honestly very pretty but very technical part of this speedrun. The movement through here is greatly enhanced by the use of Vengeful Spirit as a speed tool rather than just as damage, which is mainly how the game intends us to use it. When we use Vengeful Spirit in the air, we actually get a little bit of pushback. So something like that. You can use it to access ledges that you are not supposed to get to, and this gives us a pretty significantly better route through Greenpath the first time that we're here. So we can walk directly up to here and access the end of the area much faster. There are two of these here. This one saves very little time compared to just walking around this room, but it is nice to go for as well. Those fireball skips are pretty precise. When you're first learning this run, it is pretty difficult to do them, but with a bit of practice, they become rather consistent. All right, up next we have a little mini arena, and this is a Moss Knight. This Moss Knight is actually rather weak, so it turns out that 3 fireball hits and 1 nail slash is enough to kill them. I'm going to heal real quick just to make sure that we are fine for the next little bit. The Moss Knights here are also programmed to back up if you are about to be right on top of them, and we can abuse that AI to get them to jump backward like you saw there, and get a... sorry, I had to focus for that quick kill there. That was Vengeful King. But we can get a quick kill on those Moss Knights like that. Alright, Vengeful King also more or less melts to the joy that is Vengeful Spirit. Alright, so this Moss Knight, if we time things right, we can get that Moss Knight to just stand still while we pogo them forever. But unfortunately, one of the pogos was a little bit too far up, and the Moss Knight jumped back, but that's okay. Still pretty quick. These Moss Knights, luckily, again, not too strong. They die in just 3 hits of our fireball and 1 hit of our nail. If you're familiar with Hollow Knight as a casual game, you may have mostly focused on the nail or the sword for combat, but spells are actually extremely powerful in this game, and in this speedrun especially, where we have to pick up every single spell, we are going to be using spells as our primary source of damage for basically the entire game. The first spell we picked up, of course, was Vengeful Spirit. That already deals 3 times as much damage as our unupgraded sword here. As we pick up more spells, that difference will become even starker. So the damage of the base nail is 5 damage per swing. Vengeful Spirit deals 15. Other spells that we pick up can deal up to 120, so I'll be describing those as we pick them up. But expect to see a lot of spell usage, something you might not be as familiar with from your casual playthrough. Alright, there was Hornet, one of the first major walls in the game, and also the subject of the as-yet no release date planned sequel. So Hornet is a fan favorite and a pretty interesting boss fight when you are first playing the game, but not much to worry about in the speedrun. Hornet does, however, have our most important ability, which is the dash ability. This is the Mothwing Cloak, and we can use it to dash, both in the air and on the ground. Once we pick up dash, the game really opens up a little bit. We can access a lot more areas, and we can, more importantly, move very quickly. You're going to see me dashing basically every single moment I can, because dashing is fast, believe it or not. We are entering now the Fungal Wastes. Fungal Wastes is where we're going to find our next major ability, which is probably the most important ability as far as this Metroidvania is concerned. It is the Mantis Claw. That will allow us to climb walls and jump off of them. Mantis Claw is basically essential to accessing the later parts of the game, and especially to finishing the game. It is actually hard required, so Mantis Claw and Dash are the two real cornerstones of basically all the movement in Hollow Knight. We're going to do a trick in this room, which is called Explosion Pogo, and I'm going to go for it here with 3 fireballs. All right, that was the trick. That trick right there is not as hard as it looks. It's a lot of fun. You basically use fireballs to stall in the air while you wait for the sporg from an enemy there to get low enough that you can... Oops, I messed up the Mantis Pogo. That's okay. Get low enough that you can actually pogo it to get over here. It saves about 40 seconds compared to going around, and it is a bit tricky. That's another trick that's different on the latest patch of the game than the earlier patches. It was a lot easier on earlier patches, but luckily we found ways to make that both consistent and fun. All right, so there's the Mantis Claw, and you can see I can now jump up walls. We're going to be doing that quite a bit in these next couple of sections, but unlike the any percent run, which you may have seen before, we are going to actually take quite a big detour here for all skills. We are going to go and pick up another spell, which is rather far away at this moment. It is Howling Wraiths. That is a very good spell on the latest patch of the game. In this run, we're going to be using it as damage for basically the entire early part of the game. Our nail, again, is dealing 5 damage. Vengeful Spirit, like I said, is dealing 15. Howling Wraiths will deal 39 for now, and it will go all the way up to 60 once we get a charm to equip to boost our spell damage. So that is a very powerful tool to have early in this run. And this is actually a pretty new reroute of this category. Just this month, this category was rerouted to include this early Wraiths, and it is a lot of fun as a result. One of the few categories to actually get Wraiths this early. All right, this is a big cycle-locked room. It's a tricky room. I missed just one little bit of the cycle there, but not too bad. You can actually go through that room continuously with avoiding all of the electricity if you are quick enough, but it's a tight cycle, definitely hard to do. Here we have the Howling Wraiths Arena, so this is where we're going to find that spell that we so desperately want. But first we have to go through a brief arena filled with these mosquito enemies called squits. Wave after wave spawns, but it's in a consistent spawn pattern and pretty easy to handle if you are familiar with the arena. All right, so that's Howling Wraiths. One thing that we've done actually already in the speedrun, but I'm going to do again here, is quit to menu. And what quitting to menu does, it saves our progress, but it puts us back to the last bench that we sat on. Sometimes there are cases where we're going to quit out and will appear somewhere that we actually haven't sat. If you were paying close attention at the beginning of the run, you might know I never sat at this bench here. There are places in this game which are called hard saves, where the game will save you to a location even though you haven't sat there. We're going to use that actually in 3 separate instances here throughout this run to return to a place where we have been but have not sat. It's helpful for routing just to get back to somewhere that we've already been, but we don't want to have to walk all the way back. All right, this next bit is a little bit of calm movement, definitely a low-key part of the run. We are going to be heading to our next little mini-boss, which you can actually encounter quite early in this game. This is Gruzmother that we're coming up on. Gruzmother is going to absolutely melt to our newfound Wraiths ability. So this is one reason that we pick up Wraiths as early as we do. But just a couple of Wraiths and a couple of nail slashes, and that boss fight is over. The other thing that Wraiths is very helpful for is something that we call cleanup. So when this boss dies, they spawn a bunch of adds. Oops, a little bit early there. If you time that right, you can actually kill all of them in just a single Wraiths cast, which is very, very nice, and saves quite a bit of time compared to other methods of killing all of those adds. All right, and here we are going to buy the only charm that we're going to see in this run. The way that charms work in Hollow Knight is basically a temporary upgrade system. You can equip them to your character using charm notches. You start with 3 by default, and that is how much Shaman Stone costs. Shaman Stone is the charm that we just picked up, and it is a big, big boost to our spell damage. Like I said earlier, Howling Wraiths was dealing 39 damage before. It will now deal 60. Our Fireball, which was dealing 15 before, will now deal 20. And we'll pick up more abilities that will also get boosted by Shaman Stone as we go. Now, you may be concerned that I just died there. That was actually fully intentional. I'm doing something called the Shade Skip. And that involves intentionally dying to set up your shade so that you can pogo it to get up here to Blue Lake. This saves a lot of time. It allows us to access the east side of the map before we have any kind of vertical movement ability like Monarch Wings or even Crystal Heart. This is very helpful for the routing for all skills, but also for any percent, and you may be familiar with it from one of those. So we are going to head into City, and we're going to make our way rather slowly to our next major ability, which is Desolate Dive. But we take a bit of a detour to get there, and there's a good reason for this detour, but we'll explain that as we get later in the run. Essentially, we'll have to get to the right side of City at some point in order to finish the game. But for right now, what we want is basically to get all of our movement sorted so that we are ready to quickly clear all the areas that we need to get to. On the way to the left side of City, I'm going to stop in here, which is effectively mini-boss. Technically, this is just a regular enemy, but really acts like a mini-boss in this run and in casual play as well. This is Gorgeous Husk. They have a lot of health and drop a lot of money when you kill them. So 420 Geo is exactly what we got out of Gorgeous Husk. That is a very efficient way to get a little bit of money for the purposes of this run. We don't actually need that much money in this run, but it is still necessary to buy several things, including stag stations as we go through. All right, here I am taking a quick trip into Spire. You may recognize this area if you've seen the Hollow Knight run, or if you've played or the Hollow Knight any percent run, that is, or if you've played the game casually. We got up here a little bit early with a background pogo, which is one of probably the major sequence breaks that is used in any percent, and also frequently found casually, actually. A lot of casual players end up doing that to get up here. This is usually used to get to the Watcher Knights, which are just above us, but we are going to ignore them for now. We'll be back later when we have more damage. Instead, we are going to cross this bridge and open a shortcut here into the left side of City, which is almost the intended progression in this game, actually. After you get Mantis Claw, it's normal to head into the left side of City via a door in Fungal Wastes, and using an ability, or not an ability, but a key you pick up called the City Crest. We didn't pick up that key, so we needed some other way into the left side of City, and we took a little bit of a detour so that we can get back to those Watcher Knights more easily later. But this is Soul Sanctum, and it is where we're going to find our next ability. It is another spell, this one called Desolate Dive. It is an area that is full of enemies that love to absolutely ruin your day. They teleport, they shoot things at you, they can spawn directly in your path. It is a bit of an RNG fest and one of the less consistent areas in the speedrun. But luckily, with a little bit of careful movement, it's not too bad to get through. We found a mini-boss there called a Soul Warrior. We'll be seeing another one of those later in a slightly harder fashion. See what I mean? They can absolutely just teleport directly into you. Oh no! That is Soul Sanctum for you. This place can be absolutely rough. This room in particular is generally considered the worst room in Soul Sanctum because there are 3 different teleporting enemies. That was actually not the worst pattern I've ever seen, so we will take it. 3 different teleporting enemies. All of them can absolutely just end up in your path. So that was Soul Sanctum. Thank you, Soul Sanctum, for giving an accurate depiction of what this is like in a no reset context. All right, this is Soul Master, and I'm going to be doing a trick here where I throw myself into spikes, and the reason for that is I'm actually trying to get control during the scream there, during the boss scream. So that let me get a little bit of extra damage in at the very start of the fight in exchange for 1 little bit of health. Luckily not too bad. This is a boss that is also very fond of teleporting, but luckily with Howling Wraiths, that spell we picked up right after Mantis Claw, the boss fight ends up being very quick. So spells are extremely powerful in this game, and we are going to be using them all throughout this run to kill bosses as quickly as we can. Even with a completely unupgraded nail, we can kill almost all the bosses in this game very quickly. Even here in the second phase, there's a little bit of a fake out there where Soul Master pretends to give us the ability that we're seeking. In the second phase, Howling Wraiths is again very useful, and we can get through it pretty quickly. Alright, so this is where we get our next major spell. It's Desolate Dive, and this one acts as both a source of damage and also a bit of progression. So the way the Desolate Dive works is it is the down spell to go with the up and the side spell that we have so far. It lets us shoot downward and actually break some floors. There's a couple of different types of floors in the game that are breakable. They usually have some kind of cracked ground, or in that case, glass, and we will be breaking through those in just a moment. But this will be our progression into Crystal Peak, where we're going to find our next major movement ability, and also an important source of damage throughout the run. All right, we had the nice fake dive there. Those dive floors can be broken by diving through them or also diving just to the side of them. If you dive just to the side, they break, but you don't fall through. Very helpful if you want to stay at the top of the dive for some reason. So we need dive to exit this area. We can't actually quit out. If you were wondering from earlier, we did a save and quit last time we picked up a major spell. Unfortunately, that does not work with Desolate Dive. Generally, the game puts these hard saves at places where it expects you to sort of need to learn something about the ability you just picked up. Dive is no exception. Dive is an ability that you need to understand can be used to open those floors. So they put a bunch of floors between where you pick up dive and the only way out. So unfortunately, we cannot just save and quit out, and instead have to actually walk out of Soul Sanctum. We're going to walk up to a stag station coming up here, and stag stations are something I haven't talked about at all because we haven't used them yet, but they are the game's in-game fast travel system. They're only in a handful of locations, and we'll be using a few of them throughout the run. But they allow us to move quickly between areas, but they do require that you visit them and unlock them before you can travel to them. So we'll be returning to this area in a while, but we're also going to be using this to return all the way back to where we were at the very beginning of the game, which is Dirtmouth. This actually ends up being the closest stag station to where we want to go, which is Crystal Peak. So I'm going to sit on this bench here. This is not for safety. This is part of the route. Once again, I am going to want to quit out at some point later to return to that bench. So I'm just grabbing that now so we can get back here quickly. Now I'm going to head to the right side of Crossroads. So once again, this was essentially the first area of the game. There are multiple different branching paths off of Crossroads, which is why it's called Crossroads. One was to Greenpath, which we took for Dash. One was to Fungal Waste, which we took for Claw. And the last one here is to Crystal Peak, which we're going to take for Crystal Heart, which is a super dash ability. So we are going to be going through Crystal Peak here, and there's honestly quite a lot that is going on here. This is a pretty movement-heavy bit of the run. There's a lot of pretty tight cycles that I'm going to be trying to hit as we go through here. This is an area that is known for its cycles. There's lots of lasers. There's enemies that wander back and forth. It's a lot of fun, but it's tough. Here I'm going to go for a trick called Pogaxe. We pogoed the axe. That's a pretty tough trick. It is very easy to mess up, but luckily not too bad to back up if you miss it. It's a lot of fun. You just pogo an axe tossed by an enemy, slightly RNG whether the enemy will cooperate to the degree that you want, but if they do, you get to pogo it. All right, heading up here, you can see these enemies that shoot lasers. They are a little bit random, so they are not on consistent cycles, and depending on what happens, you can get a good cycle or a bad one. And here's a boss that you probably are unlikely to see in most runs of this game. This is Crystal Guardian. This boss doesn't have any ability or anything, just a lot of money. So actually we kill Crystal Guardian here, not for any other reason, we just want money. And luckily Crystal Guardian obliges, and with Howling Wraiths it's a pretty quick fight, luckily, but we get our 300 or so geo and we can be on our way. Got a bit of a bad cycle with the lasers there, so I was simply waiting it out, and that is okay. All right, so we continue in Crystal Peak. The goal of this area is basically to get to the right side, but to get there we have to take a rather convoluted path. We have to travel up first and then come back down. The reason for that is this gate right here, which I'm going to be opening for later. This room here is the Crystal Heart room, so it's the final room before we get the Super Dash ability, and it is the most notorious cycle-based room in the game. So there's a lot of lasers that spawn, and they are on proximity-based timers. So once you get close to them, they start their cycle. That helps to make things rather consistent through this room, and we can go under the platform there. Saves about 0.2 seconds, absolutely worth it. But this room is very consistent, but also, once again, a little bit easy to mess up. If you mess up your movement slightly, then things can get out of control. All right, now we have the Super Dash ability. This is Crystal Heart, and it is going to be absolutely essential to movement. As you can see, it takes a little bit to charge up, but it is a very, very fast ability. It allows us to move extremely quickly across long horizontal sections. It is not particularly useful if we need to move up or down, but it is extremely useful if we're moving side to side. So you'll see me using Crystal Heart quite a lot as we go through this run. And it is an important complement to our movement set. All right, I'm going to heal here. The next spot that we have to go through is a dark room. So normally to go through this room, you would want to have the Lumafly Lantern. That is an item that costs 1,800 geo to buy. That's a lot of money. We do not want to have to spend that much money, so instead we learn to go through the room in the dark. It's actually not too bad once you're used to it, but definitely a bit of a scary thing if you're picking up this category for the first time. It's not too bad to purchase the Lumifly Lantern in this run if you do want a little bit of extra safety and you're just getting into the run. There's a couple more dark rooms that we're going to do toward the end of the run as well, but it's important to learn those if you want to run the optimal route. All right, here is our next major spell, and it's really an upgrade to a spell we already have. This is Descending Dark, and Descending Dark is the tier 2 version of Desolate Dive. It is now jumped into the lead as our strongest spell. Before we had Howling Wraiths dealing 60 damage. If we hit all the different parts of Descending Dark, that's actually 88 damage, which is even more. Once again, we're comparing to our 5 damage nail, so spells, once again, extremely powerful. The other useful thing about Descending Dark is it actually has iframes associated with it. So because it's a downward spell, you end up using it above enemies a lot, and the game graciously gives you some invincibility frames when you do that, so that you don't get hit by the enemies. That turns out to be extremely useful for various boss fights, because it allows you to keep dealing damage while not having to worry about dodging the enemy, essentially. So we'll be using it quite a lot throughout this run, until we pick up our final spell upgrade, really. Alright. Here we have a dream sequence, and this is actually the first of a couple dream sequences we'll see in this run, but it is to get the ability that gives access to the dream world, and that is the Dream Nail. This is, of course, one of the abilities in the game, so would probably be required for all skills regardless, but it is essential to beating the game. It is important to grab this item, even in any percent, because it is needed to unlock the gate to the final boss. So we pick it up here while we're in the area, and then we actually just immediately quit out. So we won't even get to meet the seer, who usually tells us how the Dream Nail works. Instead, we're leaving and going to spawn back on that bench we took in Dirtmouth. All right, so we spawn here, and I'm going to go talk to our good friend Sly. We saved Sly earlier in Crossroads, and we did that because Sly is the merchant in this game and sells a key that we'll need to unlock our next spell upgrade. All right, but we take a little bit of a detour before we go and do that. I'm heading up into the Howling Cliffs, which is where I'm going to get the Cyclone Slash ability. It's our first nail art, and we're going to be using it a lot in this run. Let me talk a little bit about the path to the Howling Cliffs. So this is... Oh, and I hope I don't get... Nope, got C-Dash glitched. Unfortunate. So sometimes if you C-Dash into an enemy, it kills the enemy and lets you through. Other times it hurts you instead. And unfortunately, it's a bit RNG, but I've been getting the bad RNG lately. But you may have recognized that area as the first area of the game. We go left from that area, and if we have the Mantis Claw ability, then we can climb up this wall and get into the Howling Cliffs. It's a little bit of a hidden area, but usually one that players find pretty easily in their casual playthrough. The only thing we really need up here is the Cyclone Slash ability. Everything else is relatively minor for the purposes of this speedrun, but it's a pretty important area in some other runs. Notably, the Grim DLC starts in this area, so definitely good for longer categories that include that DLC. All right, so we're going to quit out of Cyclone and make our way back into City. Stop and take a sip of water here. We are making our way toward a really upgraded version of a boss that we've already fought for an upgraded version of a spell we already have. We're going to be killing another Soul Warrior for an upgrade to our Vengeful Spirit spell, the Fireball that we picked up as the first ability in the game. I'm going to make my way down there, and we're going to actually make use of our new Cyclone ability. So Cyclone introduces a new bit of speed tech to the latest patch run of this game, which is when you start to use a Cyclone Slash, it actually makes you fall faster for a little bit. That's really not important for any particular skips, but it is important for movement. And we'll be using that quite a lot throughout the run anytime we need to fall quickly, but don't really have a good spot to try to do an inventory drop. we will instead be using the Cyclone Slash. Alright, and this is the Soul Warrior, and unlike the first one, this one's a bit of an actual fight. This is a pretty significant upgrade to the Soul Warrior, and you'll see me using the Descending Dark ability as much as I can. Luckily, D-Dark is in fact extremely powerful, and we are able to get through that boss pretty quickly. That boss is guarding just one thing, and it is the Shade Soul ability, which is what I'm going to be picking up here. That is an upgrade to our Fireball. It boosts our damage from 20 to 40, which becomes pretty good. The main use of this Fireball is that you can actually get not just 1, but 2 hits on a lot of enemies using the Fireball. So instead of dealing 40 damage, it comes closer to dealing 80. But it's a lot faster to cast than Descending Dark, which is currently dealing 88. So it's a pretty good upgrade and something you'll see for the next few bosses, once again, until we pick up our final spell upgrade. Alright, and finally you'll see the point of the detour we took earlier. So that gate that we just went through was open because we've been in this area before. This is the right side of city, and we are going up to the Watcher Knights. Normally that gate would not be open, so we had to go through this way in order to do it, which is why we took a little bit of a convoluted path to get to Descending Dark, or Desolate Dive in the first place. Alright, this is the Watcher Knights Arena. It is one of the hardest bosses in the game casually, in my opinion, but luckily, again, Descending Dark does a lot of damage. We also took a moment to break a chandelier before we started this fight. That is a little in-game bonus. You can break that and kill one of these Watcher Knights instantly. You can see the crushed carcass of them here. That means that we have one less knight to fight, and we can focus on just the other 5. Normally these spawn in pairs, essentially. The first one spawns alone, but if you take too long to fight it, the second one will spawn in. All the others spawn in pairs, but they spawn based on when you kill each one. So 2 will stay alive at a time, never 3. And if you're a little bit slow to kill one, you may have to fight both. Ideally, you want to kill them so that they die at the same time, each pair, but I was a little bit slow there. That's really just due to the patterns that we get. If they roll away from us, we can't use Descending Dark as effectively, and I really want them to just hole up in a corner for me. Unfortunately, they don't always oblige. Alright, but after Watcher Knights, we get to what the Watcher Knights were guarding, and we'll see our first use of the Dream Nail here. This is a Dreamer, and it is one of the 3 main keys to unlock the gate to the final boss. So the Watcher Knights are a story-required boss. We have to kill them to get to Lurien here, this Dreamer. This is one of 3, as we'll see in a fun little cutscene here. The other 2 are also behind, well, one is behind another boss, which we'll be fighting a little bit later, and the last one is behind a little bit of a platforming slash sort of mini dungeon, but we'll be actually skipping most of that, so we'll explain that later. You can see the first of the 3 Dreamers has been collected here, and we are on our way to hopefully opening that door. As a reminder, we get all the skills in this category, but we also need to finish the game, so that's why we come up here for this detour. No major skills up here by Lurien, but obviously quite important to get the Dreamer. Alright, so this next bit is another little bit of a chill section for a minute. Good spot for a short commentary break or donations, for example. But we are heading back down into the City of Tears again, and heading to the right this time to get to our next area, which is the Kingdom's Edge. Going through here, we really just want to collect a little bit of soul. We are going to be doing a trick pretty soon, which is our first acid skip, and it's going to be a little bit tricky. So we want ideally a little bit of soul to potentially heal with, but also just as a nice safety. All right, so we're entering through the secret passage here. This leads to the Kingdom's Edge, which is an area we have not yet been to. We're going to go through here and immediately head up. So at this moment, we don't have Monarch Wings, and we also don't have Isma's Tier. This room here is a room with a bunch of acid in it. And that is how we skip that acid. Normally, you need to pick up an ability called Isma's Tier in order to get past that acid and to swim in it. Instead, we actually make use of the Mantis Claw and the Crystal Heart ability to just sort of zoom over the bottom of the acid. The geometry is such that it's rather precise to do that, but luckily it's not too bad. Then, immediately after that, we have that fun little Primal Aspid Pogo. The Primal Aspid, of course, everyone's favorite Hollow Knight enemy, and we actually abuse them a little bit here to just get on up to this area before we have the Monarch Wings. So 2 consecutive skips to avoid using Ismas and Monarch Wings, and we can get to Hornet 2 faster. So we saw Hornet earlier. Once again, this is the protagonist of Hollow Knight sequel, which is definitely going to be out by the time this marathon happens. We saw Hornet guarding our first major ability, major movement ability of Mothwing Cloak, which allows us to dash. Hornet is also guarding a pretty major ability here, which will act as essentially the gate to the true ending of the game. We will not be getting the true ending of the game in this category, but that is sort of how Hornet acts in this game as the really the first wall of a boss you fight, and also the gate to true ending later. So that was Hornet 2. Again, we have an unupgraded nail, so I was mostly using spells throughout that entire fight, in particular the Shade Soul ability that I've been talking about. It's a really tough fight, but luckily not too bad once you are used to it. All right, so we just picked up our next major key, really. That is Kingsbrand, and it allows us into an area of the game called the Abyss. That area has another couple of abilities for us, and also the gateway to the true ending, but we will once again be ignoring that. We mainly picked this up out of order in order to do everything down in Ancient Basin in a single trip. But before we can go down there, we have one more bit of cleanup we have to do. We have a nail art we need to pick up from our friend Oro. Oro is another of the nail masters. We've met the first of them, Mato, up in Howling Cliffs. Mato gave us Cyclone Slash for free. Oro is not so kind. Oro instead charges us 800 Geo to learn his nail art. It is Dash Slash, and it's a pretty useful nail art, but definitely not as useful as Cyclone. So honestly, Oro, kind of a ripoff. Not too happy about it. Unfortunately, this is all skills, so I have to pay the 800 just to pick up this ability. Oro is the second of 3 brothers that we will be meeting in this run. The third one will come quite a bit later from now. All right, so now that we have Dash Slash, we are going to quit out once again. Quitting out, again, returns us to our last save location, which is usually a bench. In this case, there was actually a hard save that happened after we picked up Kingsbrand. I honestly don't know why this hard save exists. There's not really anything that this exit teaches you, but, you know, the game sometimes just sits you places. So instead, we spawn back here. This is mainly just a slightly faster way to get out of Kingdom's Edge versus trying to walk out from the bottom. So we are going to climb up these platforms here. This is a fun little bit of platforming. You can see we're mostly doing wall jumps off the sides of platforms. That's a little bit faster than having to land on platforms and then jump off of them. Just a little bit of movement. And then we're going to immediately fall back down and all the way down here to the first room that we entered in Kingdom's Edge and back into City the way we came in. So our trip to Kingdom's Edge is done. We've gotten everything we needed over there, and we are going to continue now down into Basin. On the way to Basin, we are going to stop for another major ability, and this one is going to require quite a few skips to get. It's Isma's Tier, which is the ability that we really needed earlier, but skipped using just to be able to get to Kingsbrand a little bit easier. All right, so there was the first part of the skip. We needed to do a spike tunnel here. That is done by pogoing the spikes at the bottom of the tunnel and then dashing very quickly before you hit the top. After that, we have 2 more Isma skips, which are more of these acid skips. Both of those are a little bit precise, but not too bad. Really consistent with practice. All right, and I'm going for a little trick here called the Isma's early control, and we get it. So I intentionally hit that inflatable enemy called a Hornet in order to set up an early control, picking up that major ability, which is Isma's tier. So luckily we did pick that up and got our early control, and we could start leaving the room faster. All right, so now that we picked up Isma's, we can head on down to Basin, and there are a couple more places where we do actually use that Isma's tier, so we didn't get it just after we needed it. Luckily, we did get it in time. This here has an RNG C-dash. I actually think I might have gotten the good RNG, but I thought I didn't, so I ended it early, and that just happens. It's okay. You lose some time there. Nothing too bad. All right. This is the Ancient Basin, and it is an area where we're going to find both really a couple of major abilities in a row. So because of the route that we've taken, where we picked up Kingsbrand before coming down to Ancient Basin, we are able to do everything down here in a single trip. So that is the main crux of the reroute that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. We pick up Howling Wraiths early in order to have everything we need when we come down here to Ancient Basin to do all of this in a single trip. And it saves quite a bit of time to do all of that in exchange for a bit of time to pick up the early Wraiths. Overall saves about 20 or 30 seconds. All right, we're going through this area here. There's a few different Malarks that spit out a bunch of acid, as you can see me trying to go through all of them. It's very difficult to get through all of these without getting hit. Most of them are actually consistent, though. And we got a nice little skip there. That is called a trans dash. I will not be explaining that further. But the Malarks are not too bad. There's 2 that really are just coin flips as to whether or not you get hit. Luckily, the boss that we are about to fight is not too hard of a boss, and it's okay if we come in on not quite full health. This is Broken Vessel, and he looks a little bit like us. Broken Vessel is a... good pattern here. Is a pretty easy boss, all things considered. But they guard the way to a pretty major ability, which is going to be our double jump ability. The way that we fight Broken Vessel is pretty much just standing on top of them and repeatedly using Descending Dark. Luckily, those iframes are pretty substantial and make it so that you really don't take very much of a hit at any point. So, good boss. All right, we're going to pick up Monarch Wings here. This is the double jump ability, and it is almost the last movement ability that we're going to pick up. It's really the last movement ability that we need for the run. The last ability that we do actually pick up is more of a technicality because of the category that we're running. We don't actually use it for anything, we just pick it up to have all of the skills. But Monarch Wings is really, really nice. It helps our movement. It helps us reach places that we otherwise wouldn't be able to. We're picking it up so late in this run that we don't get a ton of use out of it, but luckily there's still a few places where it's going to be used, which I'll, of course, point out. This door right here is what gets opened by the Kingsbrand that we picked up from doing that Hornet 2 early. And again, this is the reason that we've done all of this early so that we can come down here right away without having to return. So I'm going to fall down here in Abyss. This is a rather late game area, but there are relatively few enemies down here. This is a pretty lore impactful area as well, but I'm not exactly the person to speak on the lore of this game. All right, we are going to go up here. There is a large pool of void tendrils, which are not going to let me pass until I turn on a light to suppress it. So that's what I'm climbing up here. Along the way, you saw a lot of stuff that looked like shades. They are called siblings, and essentially It is like what's inside of the Hollow Knight here, but, you know, our siblings. Once we turn on the lighthouse, they completely dissipate, and we're able to cross this lake and get on over to where our next ability is, and it is Shade Cloak. So Shade Cloak is really an upgrade to our dash. It makes our dash have additional iframes associated with it. So it has a cooldown. Generally, we're not invincible during a dash with the dash we pick up at first. But this dash, you can see the cooldown there, the particles returning to the Hollow Knight. This dash does have iframes. You can go through enemies with it, and you can also go through shade gates, which specifically require this ability. We are not going to be using it for going through any shade gates. We are instead just going to be picking it up so that we have all the abilities. All right. We're going to be crossing the abyss now to the last ability we're going to pick up down here, which is our final spell upgrade. So we've already upgraded our Fireball. We've already upgraded our Dive. It is time to upgrade Howling Wraiths, the second spell we picked up. This is going to be the most powerful spell that we have. It shoots essentially 4 different hitboxes upward when you use the spell. Each one deals 30 damage, so we can deal a total of 120 damage with a single cast of this spell. Again, compared to the 5 that our nail is doing. So clearly, spells are the way to go for this speedrun. Abyss Shriek is fantastic, and we're going to be using it for basically all of our boss damage from here on out. Unfortunately, we only have 2 bosses left to go, so we don't get too much use out of it, but luckily we still get a solid amount. All right, now that we have everything down in the Abyss, it is time to get out of the Abyss, and this is a little fun segment called the Abyss Climb. This is a pretty tricky bit of movement. Lots of things can go wrong here, but it's actually so enjoyed by members of this community that there's a separate IL board just to do runs of this segment. Not even this full segment, but just this room. It's a really fun climb. You have a lot of fun crawler cycles you're trying to beat, and you're just doing your best to get up to the top of the room as quickly as possible. And, you know, we have to actually climb out of there because the game did hard save us when we picked up the Shade Cloak ability, mostly to, you know, teach us how to get out with Shade Cloak. All right. So now we're out of the Abyss, and I'm going to take another stag. I'm doing a fun little trick there, which is a wiggle. For some reason, if you wiggle back and forth really quickly, it causes the stag bell to show up significantly faster. The game gets confused. Oh, sorry, wrong way. The game gets confused as to whether it's waiting for a whether it's waiting for the stag bell or for the knight's turnaround animation to finish. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's fast. It's good. We do that in a couple of spots, but optimally they only save a couple of seconds. All right, so now we've returned to Greenpath. There's only one more thing that we need in this area, and it is the final nail art from the final nail master. So we've seen Oro, we've seen Mato. It's time that we see Shio, and Shio is at the end of a fun little platforming segment that I like to call the Greenpath of Pain. This area, it just has a lot of these floating enemies here that you can pogo, and it generally assumes that you want to use Crystal Heart to get through there. All right, so that was that platforming bit. This segment has 2 of the more fun platforming sections in it, the Abyss Climb and then immediately into the Greenpath of Pain. And we pick up our final nail art, Great Slash. This one is basically just a big slash. So Cyclone, we get to spin, and it's useful for falling fast. Dash Slash lets us hit a slash when we are dashing, which is, you know, niche, but sometimes nice. Great Slash is if you're just kind of standing still and you want to hit really big for some reason. It's not too useful to us in this run, but when you have nail upgrades, it's actually very useful because it deals 2.5 times as much damage as the normal swing. It can also be useful for stalling in the air occasionally. Very situational, but that's basically the only use you'll see out of it. Going to get an extra hit of soul here so I can dive through this room. This room is one of the most notoriously evil rooms in the game, infected or not. But yeah, during this we've returned to Crossroads rather, from Greenpath, and we are going to enter one final area that we haven't spent too much time in, which is Fog Canyon. There was me attempting to do a cyclone and instead doing a great slash. I guess that's what I get for bad-mouthing it earlier. Alright, so we're falling down here. We use the Isma's tier ability to get down here, but it is not strictly speaking required. If you've watched the any % run of this game, you may know that you can do all of this stuff with Crystal Heart instead of using Isma's. We really just get Isma's because it is, again, a required skill for all skills. But it does mean that one of the hardest tricks in any % is actually not required in this run, which is Queen's Garden Acid Skip. We'll be seeing that later. But before we get there, we have a giant jelly to fight, and this is Umu. Umu is the next major story boss, and this is a bit of an RNG fest. Umu has 2 attacks, a fast attack and a slow attack. We got a slow attack there, so we're hoping for, nope, 2 slow attacks. You love to see it. Umu typically does 3 attacks before becoming vulnerable, but can actually deal 4 if they feel like it. So hoping for just 3. We got the fast attack there. You can't get 3 slow in a row, luckily. And now we're going to use Abyss Shriek to just absolutely destroy Umu. So basically we just sit around and wait for Umu to finally become vulnerable and then instantly kill them. It's a good boss. Good boss. Alright, so that was Umu. We are going to now collect our next Dreamer, which is, again, essentially a key to the final boss. This is Monomon. Monomon is probably my favorite Dreamer in terms of the actual lore of the game, and by far my least favorite in terms of their location. Umu is a pretty obnoxious boss to fight, but also the one that requires the most movement to get to. You either need Isma's Tear or Crystal Heart to get to this, using not using major glitches, and that severely impacts the any % run of this game. But luckily, in all skills, we don't have to worry because we get Isma's. Alright, so we just sit through this little Dreamer cutscene here. This is, again, the second of 3 keys that we need to get to the final boss. At this point, we've actually collected all of the skills, so we're really just looking for the requirements to get to the final boss. Alright, and now we have to climb out. Each of these Dreamer pickups, or kills, or dreams is a hard save, so if you try to quit out after them, you'll simply spawn right back where you started. So instead we have to walk out of archives and continue on our way. Oops. Alright, so coming up we have another pretty movement-heavy section. There's a little bit of combat, but nothing too difficult, luckily. However, there is a lot of pretty tricky movement, and that is because we are both going into Queen's Gardens, which is a pretty late game area, but then also going to be going into Deepnest in the dark. So luckily, the rooms that we have to go through in Deepnest are not too long or too hard to navigate in the dark, but they are in fact in the dark because we still have not purchased the Lumifly Lantern, legally not considered a skill. Alright, so going through here I'm going to be using Crystal Heart and hoping that this lad does not hit me, which they didn't. Thank you, lad. Appreciated. And then I'm going to be getting a little bit of soul because this next area is in an arena. This is the Petra Arena. These enemies are called Petras. There's 2 waves. The wave with 1 Petra and the wave with 2. It's pretty easy when you have Shade Soul to get through that arena, but I promise you that in any % where you do not have Shade Soul, that arena is awful. It's actually one of the harder ones in the game somehow, despite only having 3 total enemies in it. Alright, now we're just going to continue down and head into Deepnest from Queen's Gardens. Queen's Gardens, we don't actually need anything here. We are simply passing through as a way of getting to Deepnest so that we can get our last Dreamer, which is Hera. All of this movement was very scuffed, and unfortunately I got hit as a result, but that's okay. All right, so we're going to head down into Deepnest. This way is a pretty easy way to go in the light, but unfortunately we are in the dark. So I do need to head through this first Deepnest room completely in the dark. We cannot see what we're doing. We have this little halo of light around us, which luckily acts as a guide, but we're through that first room. We got 2 more rooms to go. This room is easy. You can sea dash through almost all of it. And then this room is a little bit tricky, but luckily it's not too bad as long as this boy. There we go. No war crimes today, and we are through. All right, so that's Dark Deepnest. It's a little bit scary when you're first learning the category, but it's actually not that bad once you're used to it. Okay, so with Dark Deepnest out of the way, we come up to an area called Beast Den. But Beast Den actually has a dev-intended secret shortcut here that skips right to the end. If you're down at the bottom of that room, all of the enemies down there, well, not exactly enemies. Oh, messed up the moving here. Let me just make sure I don't die to the devout. There we go. All of the enemies down there say really suspicious things and invite you to sit on a bench that's sitting down there. I would not recommend you take that bench, actually. It's pretty bad. It's called the Trap Bench, and if you sit on it, they will lock you inside a Beast Den, and you have to go through a little, sort of mini dungeon area to get out. Not great. Definitely not what I would advise. Luckily, with Monarch Wings, we can skip the entire area and skip right to the end using the developer-intended shortcut, and pick up Hera much more easily. All right, so this is the 3rd Dreamer, the final key to unlock the Black Egg Temple, which is the door to the final boss. We are going to be heading there now. Just going to be leaving Beast Den. Once again, this is a hard save, so we do need to actually walk out of here. And we're going to be purchasing one final stag. So the stag stations... the stag station here costs 250 geo. We have just enough. There are lots of backup geo sources in the back half of this run, luckily, if you are low on geo at any point. So thankfully, it's pretty easy to make sure you have enough to pay for this stag. All right, and we're going to head to Dirtmouth. So in fun fashion, the final boss of the game is located in essentially the first area of the game, which is Black Egg Temple. It's inside of Crossroads, so we come right back to the start in order to get to the end here. This is Black Egg Temple, one of the first places you typically see when you're coming through here casually. And once you've got all 3 Dreamers, it opens up and you can hear a scream from inside. There it is. Very ominous, if you ask me. So, we're going to go in. We've got all of our skills. We've got all of our Dreamers. It's time to finish the game. And we're going to go and fight the Hollow Knight. The Hollow Knight is the final boss of this game. If you are worried about the any % ending, I won't say what happens if you're looking for any other endings, but the Hollow Knight is a pretty tricky boss, honestly. When we're only on 5 health and have nail 0, it can be trouble at times. Luckily, we do have Abyss Shriek, so my goal for this fight is basically going to be just using Abyss Shriek as frequently as I can, and if things go well, then the Hollow Knight will behave, and I will get a lot of Abyss Shrieks in, and they will die. If things do not go well, the Hollow Knight will jump around a bunch or dash, and I will not be able to fit in an Abyss Shriek. Fun fact about this boss, for some reason, it is possible when they are parrying to use Abyss Shriek to deal full damage, but only if you're facing to the right. If you're facing left, then your attack gets parried, but if you're facing right, then it does not. All right, slightly rude there. At the very end, we got the final scream, but that is the Hollow Knight. And time will be when the screen fades to black after fully absorbing Hollow Knight here. We're getting currently essentially the bad ending of the game, but that is okay, because this is all we need for all skills. All right, and that is time. The loadless timer goes for a little bit, but we don't have a good visual indication there for RTA. All right. So that is all skills. You get a good showcase of the game. You get to see, obviously, all of the skills, a lot of bosses, some fun skips and tricks, and you get to actually finish the game, which is pretty fun. It's all relatively short, a bit under an hour loadless, a bit over an hour RTA, but it's a really fun run for a really fun speed game. Hollow Knight, obviously, one of the more popular speed games that are out there, and one of my favorites, one that got me into speedrunning.